Once again, we welcome you to Moving Forward with Young Voices, moving into the year 2026. Happy New Year to everyone, and welcome to Donald Kimball, joining us as a contributor for Young Voices. Donald, I know we've had you on the program before, but for those who are meeting you for the first time, take a moment, tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me back. I'm Donald Kimball. I work for the Washington Policy Center in their communications department, so I'm also doing a lot of writing for them with tech stories and other issues as they come up, which is the reason for me being here, because we have now in Seattle, Washington, where we are based, a mayor who is a self-described socialist. This isn't just a pejorative being thrown around. It is a proud label by which our new mayor in Seattle here describes herself, and I think that her grasp on economics was so tenuous enough that it deserved an article, and so here we are.
Well, and it's crazy, but when you say, well, a socialist mayor has been elected, my first thought is, of course, Mamdani in New York City, who got all the press and all the love, over, I guess it was the New Year's holiday. They swore him right in, but I was not aware that Katie Wilson, Seattle's newly elected socialist mayor, she wasn't even on my radar screen. Talk to me a little bit about how is it that socialists, openly about socialists, are finding it easy to get elected in some of these large cities?
Yeah, well, and you wouldn't be alone. And another reason why I thought it was worth writing about. So Katie Wilson, she doesn't have the same sort of charismatic appeal as Mamdani in New York, but her playbook is very much the same. And I think that across the country, there can be different reasons, but New York and Seattle's races are similar in the sense that the incumbent candidates, or at least the established old guard candidates, even though technically speaking, Cuomo was not the incumbent, Eric Adams was. He dropped out. Cuomo, of course, was the former governor there, so he really was seen as sort of the incumbent in a sense. In the same way, the incumbents there and the incumbent in Seattle, Mayor Harrell, I think there felt like a very big disconnect from the population writ large that thought, you know what, we want to focus on things like affordability and costs. And frankly, in Seattle, homelessness is a really big deal. And for better or for worse, these socialist upstart candidates are actually talking about these issues and wanting to make real changes. Now, I think these changes are not, the way that they are prescribing them are terrible, but they are at least addressing these issues that people care about, where it feels like the establishment people are not necessarily as connected. I think the other problem, of course, specifically in Seattle, was that while Mayor Harrell, Bruce Harrell, the incumbent, was not moderate. He was on the left. That is just a fact. Relative to Katie Wilson, he should have taken the moderate lane, and he should have made better overtures to the disaffected Republicans and independents in Seattle, and he probably could have overcome this very, very close election. It was not a blowout in Seattle like it was in New York City. It was very, very close. The initial returns showed Mayor Harrell winning re-election, but then in the later vote tallies, she pulled ahead. He should have appealed there. He did not, and so that was part of the reason why the socialists got in.
Donald, I've heard it said in New York City, the reason that Mamdani was elected was because younger voters went for him in greater numbers. Are we seeing anything similar that would suggest it was younger voters that actually, pushed Katie over the top?
I haven't seen specific numbers on that, but based on but based on sort of word of mouth and what I've seen, that would probably add up. I think that a lot of the younger people were also more motivated to vote. A lot of older people who maybe are more skeptical of socialism also just didn't feel inspired by Bruce Harrell, because again, he was not pitching a moderate vision in response. To give an example, they were talking about crime, and there was a debate interview kind of forum that was set up, and when they asked, what would you do in response to someone who committed a crime in a certain way? And Mayor Harrell, instead of saying something like, well, we can't allow this to happen, we have to protect people's property, or we have to protect their safety, he said something, well, I'd want to ask them why they were doing what they were doing. Now, again, it's not the most inane response in the world, but it certainly isn't going to win you any favors with business owners in Seattle or homeowners or families who are tired of things being broken into and worrying about their safety or their livelihoods. And so it's just an example of sort of these blunders where he kind of tried to go appeal to the left, where he was never going to out-left the socialist. So as far as younger voters, I think that is probably true. I can't back that up with specific numbers, but there just also was a very poor understanding of the threat from the incumbent's team in terms of who he should be appealing to and how he needed to run a campaign.
Again, I'm having to reference Mamdani just because he got so much press coverage, but he was talking about, we're going to take away the frigidity of individualism and embrace the warmth of collectivism. And I was like, holy cow, here we go. Are we hearing similar rhetoric from Katie Wilson?
Yeah, we are. And the thing is, again, Mamdani has more of a charismatic appeal than she does. So the way he speaks tends to be more in these sort of flourishing statements that, frankly, the funny comparison I've heard is sounds like he's an Ayn Rand villain, which is fairly accurate. But she shares this ideology. And one of the reasons why I wrote this article for National Review, the title is A West Coast Mamdani, is because she has parroted some of his very same talking points when it comes to things like publicly run grocery stores. And so when we're talking about the needs of people and affordability, her solution to these problems is that, well, the real problem is that places like Fred Meyer have vacated certain communities in Seattle, and that leaves a food desert because there's no grocery store there, so people can't get groceries. And this is unnatural. That was her quote, was that food deserts are unnatural. And this struck me as a very poor understanding of how the world works. If you think that providence is the default state of humanity, you don't understand that the tremendous amount of wealth, the tremendous amount of elimination of poverty and hunger worldwide has not been a result of the natural order, but rather of the cooperative, natural behaving of human action. And so that was, again, that in this way, she very much echoes Mamdani, but also echoes him in the wrong ways with the wrong solutions. Wow.
It's on the one hand, it's like, wow, as goes the East Coast, so goes the West Coast. But the problem is you have people, and again, I'm hearkening to stuff I've heard from New York, where they're saying, well, we're going to take over housing, for instance. Housing will no longer be a thing. That's a under socialism, under collectivism, that's individual property. That's a bad thing. Has Katie Wilson likewise targeted property owners for equalization or whatever the acceptable term may be?
It has not been as big of a focus on her campaign, specifically rent stabilization. If I'm not mistaken, I think she's talked about entertaining the idea, but she hasn't made it a big push. She has talked about specifically allowing more building for emergency housing and shelters and things like that. Whether or not we'll get there remains to be seen. We have a lot of housing and emergency and low income shelter type options that are just not filled in Seattle because the government once again thinks they can solve the problem by forcing people into behaviors they want them to behave in, but that's not how people work. People are free agents, and oftentimes just because you build something doesn't mean that homeless, drug abused, and otherwise incapacitated individuals are going to take those and be responsible for them. So it's not been as big of an issue, but she also has her own solutions that rely on a government first agenda that I don't think will pan out in the way she wants it to.
Is there any chance that anyone could anonymously donate a copy of Economics in One Lesson? Maybe a little Henry Hazlitt, might open up some possibilities there?
I would hope so. And, in the off chance that she ever reads National Review, maybe just a slight glance on this article I wrote will give her a taste of that, because that is one of the greatest books of all time, in my opinion. And I think she could learn something from it. Hopefully that came across in some of my writing. And
barring that, of course, we would encourage anybody within earshot, if you haven't already read that book, you won't get hoodwinked by a lot of promises.
Exactly right.
Again, we're talking with Donald Kimball. He is a Young Voices contributor. Donald, where can we find you on social media? Where can we follow you?
Yeah, follow me on X at Kimball Donald. You can find my written work at kimballdonald.com. And check out Washington Policy Center. All the work we do there for Washington State is very important, and I'm very proud to work with amazing colleagues there.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. We are happy to welcome Oliver Dean back to the program. Happy New Year to you, Oliver. And for those who are meeting you for the first time, take a moment here and tell us just a little bit about yourself.
So I'm a final year history and politics student at the London School of Economics. Obviously, I'm also a political commentator with Young Voices, and I'm the president of the LSE Hayek Society, which aims to promote free market ideas, free speech ideas on campus.
So I understand you had the opportunity to watch a debate between Gary Stevenson and Dr. Kristian Niemietz of the Institute of Economic Affairs. And I want you to set the stage for us here, Oliver. What was it that prompted this debate, and what exactly were they arguing?
Yeah, so this production company in the UK reached out to our society and asked us to host this debate between Gary Stevenson, and he wanted to debate what he quoted as a real economist, so someone who had academic credentials, someone who wasn't one of these, political figures or commentators as he's normally debated on TV. And the premise of the debate was whether the super rich were destroying the UK. And Gary's position, so Gary's economics, he's quite famous here in the UK. He's known for being a big advocate of wealth taxes, of combating income inequality, critiquing capitalism and free markets. And his entire argument was essentially that, yes, the super rich are destroying the UK. And Kristian Niemietz's point was obviously the opposite. His argument relied on the fact that, capitalism has actually done wonders for both the UK and other countries abroad, and that the free market has allowed people to reach, levels of economic freedom that have never really happened before. And so that was kind of the stage for the debate and the kind of guiding premise and guiding question of the entire conversation.
So let's talk about why is it that equality by edict never really seems to pan out? Because it sounds like Gary Stevenson would very much like to use edict to achieve that equality.
Yeah.
What are the laws that come into play though that prevent that from happening? I'm talking about natural or economic laws.
Yeah, and I suppose because Gary's entire argument and his entire foundation for his points were all relying on this personal anecdote of these stories, of these. A lot of the time, he would literally turn to the audience and say to them, do you think this? Do you feel this? Are you experiencing this? And there was actually at one point, and I mentioned this in the article, where he turns around and says, economists use data too much, and there's this over-reliance on statistics, on data, on numbers. And kind of everybody was just sat there, and Kristian, I can't remember if he actually laughed or if he just kind of sat there in silence. But, a lot of us in the room were sitting there thinking, well, if we're not going to use data, what are we actually going to use? And the reason why this is so important is because if we actually look at the data and we look at, for example, Gary was massively in favor of introducing a wealth tax here in the UK. If we actually look at the data where wealth taxes have been introduced before, we've seen that they fail time and time again. We've seen it in France and we've seen it in Spain. And we've seen multiple forecasts from reputable bodies here in the UK, so the IFS and the OECD, all coming out saying that if the UK were to implement a wealth tax, it simply wouldn't work. And so, it's clear why Gary is so insistent that we are too reliant on the data, because the data actually goes against his entire point.
It's interesting, too, where there are real-world examples like Spain that have tried this. What are some of the things that they found? When they go to tax wealth, what do the holders of that wealth tend to do?
Yeah, so a lot of the time they will actually transfer that wealth into non-taxable types of income or non-taxable assets. And so a lot of the things that they will do is move it into things like property, or even just move it overseas. So Spain had that particular example where a lot of millionaires and billionaires quite simply just moved their assets overseas. And so they went from, getting very little tax revenue from these groups to actually getting no tax revenue whatsoever. The case with France, I think the numbers were about 42,000 millionaires actually left France over the course of about 10 to 15 years. And the French president, Emmanuel Macron, actually ended up reversing the law and abolishing it because so many wealth creators had left France that he needed to incentivize them to come back. And the only way to do that was to promise that, their wealth wasn't going to get taxed.
So I don't know if that was brought up to Gary Stevenson, but if so, how would he answer those real world examples where it didn't pan out?
Well, see, this is the problem because Gary's entire argument, and this is what I was going to, this goes to the point that I made earlier, which is that he doesn't actually care about the data. He doesn't care that these real world examples exist. And, we can also talk about his critique of capitalism. And if he wanted to bring in, some type of socialist model, we could sit there and list every single socialist state that has failed over, the last 50 to 100 years. But it would never be enough for him, and he doesn't seem to care. And his entire argument rests on this vibes-based type of policy thinking. And the problem with that is that, it might work to win over an audience in a room. I think, we had about 200, 300 people in the room. It might win over the audience there. But when you actually put it to paper and you actually do the maths and you look at the data, you see that it doesn't work and people are going to be worse off as a result.
Wow. I mean, look, I know data can be cold and impersonal, but at the same time, it also seems like it's a lot more reliable than simply feelings.
Yeah, and I think this is what is so important that Gary needs to get into his head, and people like him. I mean, we're seeing here in the UK a lot of left of centre figures relying on people like Gary's economics and his economic ideas to build their economic ideas and their economic rationale. And people need to recognise that data, it doesn't matter whether you agree with the data or not. The data is the data, and the data is true. And if the data goes against your viewpoint and your worldview, then maybe it's time that you actually switch your worldview and you go down the correct route.
No, that's harsh, but it's fair. And it's actually rooted in reality as opposed to, but I feel this way. Just tell me, in Great Britain, is there an undercurrent of envy for those who have wealth? I mean, I see this playing out in many countries. Do you see that happening there as well?
I would say we saw it peaked rather a bit in the summer of 2025. So this was when Zach Polanski, the leader of the Green Party, or now leader of the Green Party, came to power. And he basically went on this pledge that we're going to tax the rich, we're going to tax wealth, not work. And a lot of people were agreeing with this. I mean, we saw the Green Party at one point shoot up to second in the polls, which is something that we hadn't seen for, years before this. So there was definitely some level of appetite. But I think what's happened is that people have started to realize that actually the facts don't align with this idealistic version of reality. And people are starting to see, as I mentioned, the piece that I wrote, we've seen it in Spain, we've seen it in France, these real world examples where actually this doesn't work. And so I think the temperament has kind of died down a little bit, and people are, seeing that, there are much better ways that we can go about, fixing our country. The main one is bringing public spending under control. We've seen, record high public spending levels for year after year now. And so people are definitely falling out of faith with it, I would argue.
We've got about a minute left here, but let's talk about incentives. When you tax wealth, whether it's annually or even all at once, I'm just curious, what does that do to people who otherwise would be inclined to save or to invest their money?
Yeah, well, it encourages them to move away. And I mean, I think the clearest example of this is the Laffer curve, and this idea that if you push taxes to too high of a level, people just turn around and say, well, if you're going to take all of this money away from me, if you're going to take all of this hard-earned cash that I've made away from me, then what's the point in working? I'll just move my money overseas. And what we're actually seeing is this mass exodus of talent in the UK, of particularly young people aged between 18 and 34, actually moving abroad and taking their tax money with them because the tax burden is just so high here in the UK.
Again, we are talking with Oliver Dean. He is a political commentator with Young Voices and also studies history and politics at the London School of Economics and Political Science, where you are president of the LSE Hayek Society. Where can people find you? Where can they follow you on social media?
People can find me on Twitter at the Ollie Dean, or on LinkedIn or Instagram, whichever works best for people.
Thank you so much for being our guest. I look forward to the next time we get to chat.
Thank you.
Welcome back. This is our third segment today of Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome Joseph Bouchard back to the program. Happy New Year to you, Joseph.
Happy New Year. It's good to be back.
For those who are meeting you for the first time, tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I'm a journalist. I'm a researcher. I focus on Latin American politics. I'm currently doing a PhD in Latin American politics at the University of Virginia.
Well, I'm looking at an article you had published back in December. This was on the 22nd, titled, "Could Maduro Playing to Trump's Ego Avoid War?" Which was a very legitimate question because we had, battle carrier groups off, in the Caribbean, just off the coast of Venezuela. And it really looked like, oh my goodness, we're gearing up for some kind of an invasion. Well, some things have happened since then that have kind of changed the equation, but bring me up to speed. What, as you wrote this article, obviously there was some deepening tensions. Talk to me about what caused those, and then let's talk about what's happened since.
Yeah, well, it seems like playing to Trump's ego didn't really work. Maybe it was something about Maduro Trump didn't like particularly. But so basically you had on, I believe, Saturday, a U.S. military intervention in Venezuela that right before, in the late hours of the night, they did a few targeted strikes, mostly in Caracas, but also in other cities, taking out very specific military energy and political infrastructure. And then basically Delta Force troops went into Caracas, captured or abducted, depending on the word you want to use, Maduro and his wife, and then put them on the USS Iwo Jima. They went to Guantanamo Bay for a bit, and then to New York, where he's now facing trial on basically drug charges and conspiracy charges and weapons charges.
So talk to me about, as you wrote this article, of course, this was prior to that military operation, but you suggest that the one solution that Maduro hadn't tried was to give Trump a personal peace offering. What would that look like?
Yeah, so I had a few ideas. I initially thought, it would be funny if they, met and had sort of the same thing as the Kim Jong-un summit where they would break bread and write letters and, exchange this really beautiful friendship. And then I thought of a few more ideas. You could, Venezuela is a very rich country. You could build him the biggest statue of a world leader in the world, maybe a gold statue. You could dedicate Miraflores Palace, which is the presidential palace, to him, as real estate and use it as like a Trump hotel. You could build him a golf course. Venezuela has plenty of very beautiful, beach locations, valleys, farmland. You could give him all of Venezuela's oil, personally. Basically, it was mostly a joke article, but the main point was that Trump plays personality politics and that foreign leaders since time immemorial have used gift giving and offerings to stop wars, going back to the Egyptians, basically, and the Vikings. And, they would offer even their family members, territory, whatever it is to avoid war. And it usually worked. And this could be one of those cases, but it seems like it didn't work.
Yeah, I love the line in your article, "In the interest of peace, nothing should be off the table." And I'm curious, in your estimation, in your opinion, would this have come down to a military invasion of Venezuela by the U.S. had last weekend's events not transpired?
It's definitely possible. I mean, in my home country in Canada, change of leadership was everything, all it took for the U.S. not to pursue more aggressive actions against Canada. Trump basically had a very personal gripe with Justin Trudeau, did not like him. Maybe it started when basically Ivanka Trump was looking at Justin Trudeau at that table, and it was the media ran with the story that they were maybe having an affair or something. Maybe that irked him since then. Basically never let it go. And the Canada-U.S. relationship under Trump was at its worst maybe ever. And now you had Trudeau stepping down, you had an election, and then the Liberals won, kept the same cabinet, basically the same policies mostly, but then you had a different person, and Mark Carney, the new prime minister, is more friendly with Trump they come from a similar background. Carney was a businessman, a banker, consultant, and Trump respects that kind of person. Carney's a lot more, tactful, is not as publicly hostile to Trump, doesn't mock him, these kinds of things that Trudeau would do. So it could be, it's one of a few instances where that's happened with Trump specifically. So that could very well be. Same with Zelensky. You had that meeting in the White House where basically Zelensky was accused of not respecting the United States, not respecting Trump. And then immediately the next few weeks did a PR campaign, tried to extend an olive branch to Trump and tried to mend relations and be more friendly. And it seems like it's worked. The U.S. sent more weapons and funding to Ukraine and drawn red lines with Russia and, forced Russia to the table. So this could be one of those cases, but it's too late to know now.
Something you point out in the article, and I know some people will take this as very hard, but you point out that Trump has this thing in common with other leaders who had cult-like followings and authoritarian instincts. And this is not to say, therefore, he is exactly the same, but he does share some common traits with President Juan Perón of Argentina,
yes.
Benito Mussolini, the Italian dictator, or even former Iraqi President Saddam Hussein. Now, that's not an attack on Trump so much as an observation that these kinds of politicians who ego is a big part of how they do their business, they have to be approached, I guess, on their terms in that respect.
No, that's right. And, I wasn't trying to insult Trump. I was more trying to talk to maybe anyone from the Maduro team who might read that and think, okay, what can we do personally to do this? And is there precedent to this? Does this work? And the Saddam Hussein point is interesting because he also had two sons who were very particularly, they were fond of partying and gifts and luxurious lifestyle and even, the United States. And so the U.S. could have, tried to maybe get them on their side by, using that to their advantage. This is the same case with, Donald Trump Jr. or Eric Trump. There are lots of similarities on these points, and that basically you should meet him where he is, which is that personality is everything, status is everything, and try to use that to try to make peace. But sadly, it didn't work.
So it's, as you point out, it's kind of a moot point then for Maduro. Who else, though, on the international stage might benefit from this advice that, if they need to make nice with Trump, they probably should be looking to reach him through his heart and maybe through a bit of flattery. Is there anyone else out there who might heed this warning?
Yeah, well, close to home, there's Gustavo Petro, the president of Colombia, who's made very clear his disdain for Trump. He's called him a pedophile and a few other things in the last few days and weeks and months, and taken a very adversarial stance. And as a result, the U.S. cut all funding to Colombia, cut commercial ties, security ties. It's possible now that there are strikes or even an invasion, similar to Venezuela, against Colombia. So maybe the president could listen to this and try to maybe change the direction a bit to try to preserve peace.
Okay, I want to recommend people should read your article, even though current events, have now taken the option of, well, maybe he can flatter his way out of war with Trump. Nope, he's in custody. It's a done deal. Where can people find this article? And then on top of that, where can they find you and follow you on social media?
So the article is with Fair Observer, and I've also done 2 podcasts now with them on this topic. And you can follow me and my articles on Twitter X at GeoPaulWonk, where I post a lot on Latin American politics, including on Venezuela.
Okay. Hey, thanks for keeping an eye on some of these things that may not garner as much headlines as some other issues, but I sure appreciate your insights, particularly for Latin America. And Happy New Year to you, Joseph, and we'll look forward to talking again.
Thanks, Brandon. Happy New Year.
Welcome back. We are happy to welcome Sofia Hamilton back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Sofia, great to catch up with you once again. For those meeting you for the first time, tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on today again, Brian. I'm always happy to be here. So a little bit about me. I am a spokesperson with Young Voices, and my main focus is drug policy and focusing on practical, common sense reforms to improve consumer safety.
And I'm looking at an article that you wrote for American Thinker about saying no to Kratom prohibition. And I'll admit, up until about 8 years ago, I had never heard of this drug, Kratom, but some people who were dealing with like chronic pain issues and stuff like that swore by it. For those who've never heard of it before, have no idea where it comes from, and to a degree, this is also me, what exactly is Kratom?
Yeah, so it is it's a drug that comes from Southeast Asia. It's incredibly popular over there. It's from a plant, it's a leaf, and you can either consume it by smoking it or orally if it's broken down and put into a powder or a liquid. I don't know the specifics of it. But it is becoming more and more popular in the United States. If you go to any smoke shop, you'll probably find it there. I see signs for it everywhere. And it's incredibly popular within the community of patients who are dealing with chronic pain. It is somewhat similar to an opioid. I don't want to say that it's an opioid-like drug because it's chemically different. It's addictive in different ways than opioids. And I think the opioid term sounds really scary and it leads people to jump to conclusions. But a lot of patients that have used opioids or they don't want to use opioids for their chronic pain have gone to using Kratom because it has less drawbacks than opioids, or maybe it just works for their unique health issues.
Well, I know anytime anything remotely resembling opioids comes up, that tends to get, the FDA involved. And talk to me about, does this drug have psychoactive properties to it?
It does. It does have psychoactive properties, and I've never used Kratom, so I don't know the specifics of how it makes you feel. I know it's different than opioids, but the FDA has been giving it a lot more attention as it's gained greater popularity. And this isn't the first time the FDA and DEA has given a watchful eye to Kratom. About a decade ago, they were considering scheduling Kratom. Right now, it's not scheduled. So it's basically unregulated, and it's in this really weird gray area where there's not really any regulation. There's no one making sure that the products that they're selling at the smoke shops, at the convenience stores, at the gas stations are pure, that they're following the same consistency, that the dosages are the same throughout. But then the federal government is looking at totally banning it by making one of the compounds in Kratom, it's 7-OH, a Schedule 1 drug. And so that would basically take Kratom completely off the market and stop individuals from being able to access it, at least legally, on the legal market.
I like how you qualified that, because if there is a demand for something, people will find a way. Prohibition really doesn't seem to work. But I'm curious whether is it a good move? Is there a track record, like for the FDA to move in and regulate it, essentially to make it almost unavailable? Can they point to problems or point to dangers posed by Kratom that would justify that kind of a move?
Yeah, so I actually wrote about this issue for American Thinker in December, and I understand the concerns around Kratom. I actually almost accidentally bought a drink that had Kratom in it because I didn't realize. I was in California, I was hiking, I went to this really cool tea shop, and I realized that one of the drinks had Kratom in it. And because I work in drug policy and I am aware of everything, I knew that I didn't want to have that drink. That's not what I was looking for in that tea shop. But a lot of people don't have that same understanding of drugs. And so a lot of people have accidentally purchased Kratom drinks, and some people have even gotten addicted to it. And that's not cool at all. So I think that's why the FDA has really started looking at this issue. But their solution is not the right solution. Their solution is prohibition. Their solution is the war on drugs. And we've already tried that. We know it doesn't work. And so why are we going to try it again? Right now, we're having this issue because there's practically no regulation of the kratom market. And that's why people like me are almost accidentally buying the products. There's not consistent labeling. And so instead of doing the normal thing, the common sense thing, which would be to regulate the market, they just want to ban it totally. And what happens every time there's prohibition? The illicit market gets empowered, and there's still going to be a demand for these products. So everyone's going to have to get it on the illicit market, where there's going to be even less regulation than there is now. The products are going to be even more sketchy. More people are going to be hurt. They're still going to be sold in the gas stations, because we can see the same thing with tobacco and nicotine, where these products that aren't regulated by the federal government are very easy to find in your corner stores in your neighborhoods. So I think the federal government is again going to make another mistake in drug policy if they do move to put 7-OH, the compound in kratom, as a Schedule 1 drug.
And I'm going to backtrack just a moment here, because I want to make sure I understand. People use this this is not just hey, let's get wasted, kind of thing. People are using it for therapeutic reasons, and I would assume that if it wasn't working, they would have no desire to use it.
Exactly. I think it's very similar to cannabis, where some people are using it recreationally, and then some people are using it for real medical issues. And so some people are getting wasted off of kratom and having fun with it, but other people need it for their chronic pain, and they're using it for a medicinal purpose. And those are the people that would really get hurt in this situation, because that is the medicine that works best for them. Everyone's health is very different. Maybe opioids work best for some people, other pain medicines work best, but some people like the more natural remedies like kratom, or that's just what works best for their unique bodies. And I think that's where the government really messes up, is because this is a decision that people should be making themselves. And I would hope people would be making with a medical provider like a doctor. I think that's the best solution here. And the government just needs to get out of the way. They're not our doctors, and they need to stop pretending like they are.
That is a point that more people need to get their minds around. And the idea that, people can make choices, and not everybody's required to use kratom, but for those who want to, and if it's something that they find relief in, then, it seems to me that's peaceful behavior. That's not something that government needs to intervene. Now, on the other side, it seems like job security for the FDA to say, well, we ban this, and, they've got that stature and they've got that power and the control, which I guess is really kind of the way they're looking at it.
Yeah, the FDA and DEA are just not good at their jobs, especially the FDA. They're really bad at putting good medicines on the market and allowing these life-saving pain medicines. And they're really good at banning things that are already working for people. And so it just seems like they don't want anyone to have choice. They want to have total control over what medicines we're taking, when really it's just none of their business. Let them regulate to make sure that we have safe products on the market, and let adults use the products that they want to use. It seems so common sense to me, but it really is. It's job security for the FDA. They're always going to come in and try to keep on prohibition, even though it hasn't worked over decades and hundreds of years in American history.
I like that you use the word adults, because it should be so self-evident. We should all be treated as adults if we're adults, but for some reason, regulatory agencies really don't seem to resonate with that.
They don't. They're always infantilizing the consumer, which is just such a shame.
Again, we are visiting with Sofia Hamilton. She is a Young Voices spokeswoman and a healthcare policy analyst at a DC area advocacy organization. Where can people find you on social media? Where can they follow you?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter, X. My handle is Sophie Hamilton, Sophie with an F. And I'm constantly posting and griping about all of the drug policy issues in the United States.
Thank you so much. I look forward to our next chat.
Yeah, thank you, Brian.